Netroots Nation, please welcome Secretary Julián Castro.
So great to see you.
So I get to ask this first question again?
Yes.
Yes. Secretary Castro, I wrote this sentence this morning and I'm really proud of it. So, if Donald Trump was a government agency, he'd be ICE. It is the perfect embodiment of arrogance, incompetence, cruelty, and hatred. From breaking up families to keeping children in cages, it has proven to be simply un-American. Can ICE be saved, or should it be scrapped altogether and something new built in its place?
Thank you very much, Marcos, for having me. Thanks to everybody here at Netroots. I've said that instead of breaking up families, that we should break up ICE. In the immigration plan that I put forward, that's what we would do. We would break apart ICE, and we would make sure that the kinds of abuses that we've seen never happen again. This administration traffics in cruelty, and the images that we saw yesterday were just one more example of that. He's betting, basically, that there are enough Americans out there whose fear and paranoia can be stoked in a way that they're going to go out and vote for him. And what I'm betting, with my immigration plan, is that there are enough Americans, whether they're white or black or Latino or Asian American, Native American, whether they're rich or poor, whether they live in a big city or a small town, that are going to respond to common sense and compassion instead of cruelty, that those values of respect and basic humanity are stronger than his fear and paranoia. And so that's what I would choose if I'm President of the United States.
Thank you, Secretary.
Secretary Castro, there is a gun death epidemic in our country. Not only is the U.S. gun-related death toll 11 times higher than any high-income country, but women are 21 times more likely to die by a gun. Kim Yaman asks, our nation has the highest rate of gun violence in the world outside of nations actually at war. What would you do to address this uniquely American crisis?
First of all, thank you for the question. You're right that it's absolutely amazing to look at the statistics around gun violence in our country and to compare that to other countries around the world. And it makes you ask, when you see those statistics that we know are more than numbers on a page, but represent lives that have been lost. It makes you wonder, what in the hell is wrong with our country that we have so many more deaths because of gun violence than anywhere else? And part of the answer, clearly, is that we need common sense gun reform in our country. I support universal background checks. I support limiting the capacity of magazines. I support red flag laws. I support closing loopholes like the Charleston loophole and the boyfriend loophole. There's no reason that anybody that gets convicted of domestic violence should ever get their hands on a weapon in this country. And then, on top of that, we need a renewed assault weapons ban so that these weapons of war are not out on the streets. We don't need to be arming our teachers. What we need to do is ensure that we have this common sense gun reform. I've also talked about other things that I think we need to do. For instance, we know that one of the leading ways that somebody dies because of the use of a gun is death by suicide. But we really don't talk about that as much. People fall into a depression, or they have bipolar disorder or something else, so that they spiral downward. Oftentimes, and I bet folks here in this audience know this from different family members, or more, maybe you've had a challenge yourself. We need to end this distinction in our country between physical health care and mental health care, and invest in mental health care in the United States, so that people can get the care that they need and they're not suffering in silence and they're not hindered by this stigma that still attaches itself to the idea of having a mental health issue. So if we attack this problem like that, then I believe that we can have a safer country for all of our families.
Thank you. Now we have a question from Sarah.
Yeah. Oh, another baby. love.
Do you want to go hold that baby?
I know. Look, I'm not going to be the typical politician that goes and holds the baby. All right?
She's pretty cute. Though.
Also, no. Look, my wife and I know I have a 4-year-old and we miss when he was that little, but I know I've been shaking a million hands. I don't want to hold her baby. I've been shaking a million hands. I don't want to give the baby a cold.
There's a commitment to healthcare right there. Sarah.
Hello, my name is Sarah Woodhams. This is Mia. We're from United for Respect. I worked for Babies R Us for 7 years in Montgomeryville, Pennsylvania, until my store was shut down. In recent years, dozens of companies run by Wall Street, like Sears, Kmart, Radio Shack, Payless, they've all gone into bankruptcy. Just between Toys R Us and Sears, we've lost 15,000 jobs right here in Pennsylvania. Nationally, we've lost hundreds of thousands of jobs because billionaires buy up these companies and then they make huge profits on our backs. And they get away with it because there is no financial regulation for them. As president, what would you do to hold hedge funds and private equity accountable for destroying our communities and our livelihoods?
Thank you very much for that question, and Mia is beautiful. Thank you for bringing her today. First of all, I don't believe that any bank or any company is too big to fail in our country. And I believe that everybody should be held accountable in this country when they commit misdeeds. And so we have to start out with the idea that we can't make the mistakes of the past. I put out recently a housing plan, for instance, that says that in the future, if Wall Street causes the same housing crisis that we saw a decade ago, that they will be held accountable, and that we will also work to make sure that homeowners are able to stay in their homes instead of those homes going into the hands of Wall Street. On top of that, all of us have heard in the last couple of months, and we've known for decades, that we have a tax system that rewards wealthy corporations and asks more from the middle class, the working poor, and the poor. It was reported 2 months ago that Amazon made $11 billion in profit last year, but they didn't pay any federal tax. In fact, they got a tax rebate of over $100 million. And there were 60 other well-known American companies that didn't pay any federal tax, and a whole bunch of those got a tax rebate. We need a tax code that rewards people who actually have to work instead of just people who are wealthy and wealthy corporations. And I would turn that tax code upside down and make sure that they are paying their fair share instead of overburdening people who have to work for a living. I also think that we need to build on the reforms that we made a decade ago, like Dodd-Frank, so that our financial system is more secure and it's oriented towards serving the American people, the average bank customer, the average person who is going looking for a home mortgage, those folks that are working hard, that build up this country to what it is. And that's the kind of president that I would be.
Thank you. So, I was watching the news just right now, keeping up on what's happening in New Orleans right now. As we speak, it's impacting the city, and extreme weather conditions are an increasing threat all over this country and the globe. Kelly Pollock asked, how will you use economic tools and practices to effectively fight climate change without causing hardship for communities that have already been hit hard by economic collapse and the effects of rising temperature and extreme weather?
Yeah. Thank you very much for the question. You know, we're watching the images again today coming out of New Orleans, and we keep hearing there's another 100-year flood or 500-year flood that is happening. But it's clear that these things that are supposed to be a 500-year flood are happening every other year. Whether you're in Houston or you're in Louisiana or you're in the Midwest or wherever you are, New York, New Jersey. And that's because of one of the results of climate change. I believe that we can both protect our planet and also create great jobs in the clean energy economy. The first thing that I would do if I'm elected president is sign an executive order on the afternoon of January 20th, 2021 to recommit the United States to the Paris Climate Accord. But really, that's the easy part. That's the easy part. Then we would go around the world and get stronger commitments to get to net zero in the years to come. And here in the United States, I like the idea of a Green New Deal that would invest in getting to net zero, that would impose a carbon fee, and that would also invest in getting more jobs into the hands of hardworking Americans who need them. That includes ensuring that when we do that, when we spark economic opportunity in our country, that it doesn't just go to the big cities, but it also goes to smaller rural communities. You know, a lot of people talk about Texas. Republicans in Texas like to talk about the Texas miracle. But there was an analysis that was done just recently, a few days ago, that analyzed where those jobs in Texas over the last 15 years have gone. And they've gone to Dallas and Houston and San Antonio and Austin, basically the big cities in their suburbs. That prosperity has not reached small-town America. We have to be a strong partner with states when they do economic development to invest in those smaller communities based on the assets that they have, and also to build up their capacity to succeed, investing in the infrastructure of schools, investing in rural public hospitals, because public hospitals in small towns have been closing over the last couple of decades, or some of them closing entirely, others closing their inpatient psychiatric care or OBGYN services, right? So we need an economic development agenda that includes a climate-conscious approach and that reaches everybody. We've seen that that can work, whether we're in Nevada and we talk about the solar energy industry, in Texas, the wind energy industry, in a number of other states with renewables. That's the kind of approach that I think we need in the years to come.
Thank you very much. And we have a community question, or
From Munira.
local.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Munira Edens, and I'm from Philadelphia. I lived in every section of this city, and the housing crisis looks like developers moving in and doubling my neighbors' rents. It looks like black and brown people from my community being forced to move out of their homes because they can't afford their property taxes. It also looks like people like me just anticipating being homeowners one day. So my question to you is, if you were elected, what 2 policies would you put in place to address the housing crisis, which is disproportionately affecting black and brown communities and rapidly spreading across the U.S.?
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. Let me start off by saying that I believe that housing is a human right, that it's a human right, that there's no reason, just like there's no reason that anybody in this wealthiest nation on earth should ever go without health care that they need when they need it. There's no reason that anybody should be without a safe, decent, affordable place to live in our country. We can achieve that. The question was about 2 policies. What 2 policies would I put forward? I put forward a housing plan a few weeks ago that is very comprehensive. I hope that folks will check out my housing plan at juliancastro.com. But let me stay true to the question of 2 policies, all right? Number one of the things that I include in my housing plan is to create an entitlement program from the Housing Choice Voucher Program so that if you make less than 50% of the area median income in a community, you would be entitled to get a housing choice voucher that would allow folks to go into the market and get housing. We would couple that with legislation that would prohibit landlords from discriminating against you just because you have that voucher. So they can't stigmatize you or discriminate against you because you are paying with that voucher instead of with a check or with cash. Because too often times people that have a voucher are not able to get the housing they need because the landlord won't, still believes bad things about Section 8, about the folks that are on that program. We would legislate against that. That's one thing. A second approach is with fair housing, because it's not enough to just make the housing available. You also need to make the housing available. You need to increase supply, and you need to ensure that no matter what the color of your skin is or your gender identity or your sexual orientation or anything else, that you're actually able to go and get that housing. So the second policy that I would pursue is a menu of fair housing enforcement. When I was HUD Secretary, we passed the most groundbreaking rule after the 1968 Fair Housing Act to ensure that communities had to bring about equal housing opportunity within their jurisdiction. It was called Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing. And it said to cities, to counties, to housing authorities that were getting our money, hey, you need to be more serious. You need to come up with a plan for how you're going to ensure there's equal housing opportunity in your bounds. We did AFFH, and it started in the fall of 2016. When Dr. Carson and the Trump administration took over at HUD, they did away with it. I would bring it back to make sure that we further desegregate American communities and allow for housing opportunity throughout an area, regardless of the color of somebody's skin. And couple that with more fair housing enforcement officers at the Department of Housing and Urban Development and that are funded by HUD across the nation to do the work of ensuring that in the private market, that private landlords are not discriminating against anybody because of their background, which still happens right now in the United States and keeps people from being able to move into their areas of choice. I would turn that around.
Thank you. There's been an unprecedented rollback under this administration of LGBTQ rights. What steps would you take to protect the lives of all LGBTQ people?
Thank you very much for asking, and let me just tell you very briefly about what I have done. When I was mayor of San Antonio, we passed domestic partnership benefits. This was, of course, before marriage equality. We passed a non-discrimination ordinance in 2013. We passed a non-discrimination ordinance that included the entire LGBTQ community, even when some folks wanted us to leave transgender individuals out, for instance, because they thought that it might be more politically viable or feasible to do that. We said, no, we're going to include everybody. When I was at HUD, we expanded what's known as the Equal Access Rule. We did the transgender rule, so that if you're transgender and you go to a shelter that is publicly funded, you have to be accommodated according to how you identify, what you're comfortable with. So you can't be discriminated against because of your gender identity. I would support the Equality Act so that no matter how you identify or what your sexual orientation is, that you can't be discriminated against when it comes to the housing market. You can't be discriminated against in your employment, because that still happens right now in our country. And to me, we need to have a country where we have no second-class citizens. Everybody needs to be the same. And the Equality Act is an indispensable part of helping to bring that about. On top of that, I believe that we need to ensure that, for instance, when it comes to reproductive rights, that we not only have reproductive freedom, but that we have reproductive justice that includes the trans community. And on the debate stage a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned this, and I had a slip of the tongue that was, I corrected later on Twitter. But after I mentioned this, the right wing went crazy. They went crazy, and what in the world are you talking about? And so I will say it again. We're going to include our trans community when it comes to reproductive justice in the United States of America, because that is the right thing to do. And so, you know, the story of this country, and I know we're almost out of time, the story of this country, when we've been at our greatest in the United States, has been when we've taken those strides to make opportunity and freedom more possible to people no matter who they are. The choice in this election is whether we're going to continue down that path or we're going to heed the dark call of Donald Trump to go backward. I want us to go forward. I don't want us to make our country anything again. I want us to make us better than ever into the future, better than we've ever been. Thank you very much.
Wait, hang on. We've got one
Bonus
bonus
round?
question.
All right.
One
Because
more
you brought
question?
up reproductive justice, we
Yes.
want to give you 2 minutes to answer a very important question to our audience.
Great.
Okay, and I'm going to really summarize this in the interest of time, but abortion rights are under fire from Republicans all over the country, and the Supreme Court may soon join that effort. So what would you do as president to protect those rights, expand access to patients who need it?
You're right. They have a full court assault right now on reproductive freedom. I would do several things. First of all, I would only appoint judges to the federal district court level, appellate court level, and Supreme Court that understand Roe v. Wade and the value of precedent and would protect Roe v. Wade. Secondly, I would get rid of the Hyde Amendment, because I believe that just because somebody is poor, just because they don't have money, doesn't mean they shouldn't be able to exercise their reproductive rights. I would also push back against these states like Alabama, like Missouri, like Georgia, that are passing these laws to try and abridge reproductive freedom by pursuing legislation in Congress to codify Roe versus Wade and lead that effort. And this is something that touches the lives of so many people in our country, that this is the time when we all need to step up. And I would do that if I'm elected president. Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.